Hey guys, so today I want to talk about intermolar width. What is it? Why does it matter? Why have you never heard of it? For me, 25 years in fitness, health, that's where I got my degree. I'm in my gym right now, work with all kinds of athletes from professional golfers, baseball players, fighters, to 80-year-olds just looking to get out of bed and still love life every day. And everything that I was taught in school, in fitness, no one ever talked about what's going on in this picture and why it matters. And it's crazy for me to think that at this point in my career and in life, that I had to do a deep dive for myself to start to understand what it is, why it matters, in order to save my own life, to get my health back on track, and also just try to spread everything that I've learned, because I literally think it's one of the most important biomarkers that most people have never even heard of. Like I said, 25 years in fitness. I just turned 46 years old last week, and it's crazy to me how, if I said intermolar width, most people wouldn't even know what I'm talking about. And this number, what it is, what it represents, it's like a story that tells another story. You tell me someone's age and what this number is, and based on what a really healthy number looks like versus not, it really tells me how well someone breathes, what's going on from a nervous system perspective, if they're able to sleep through the night and get restful sleep, or are these people living off 5 Red Bulls in Celsius a day, thinking like this is just life and how it's supposed to be, not even realizing there's an issue. And I think the more I speak with people about this, it's realizing that like most people just don't know. They don't understand how important it is. Their doctors don't know. It's not taught to doctors in school, because we live in a world that makes money off of people staying in the medical system. It's a system based on treating symptoms, not promoting health at all costs, even if they just break even. And from a business model, they're great. They do just that. And what I found for most health issues is it all comes back to this: breathing. Can someone actually sleep and recover? Is someone over-breathing for their entire life and they blow out their immune system? At some point, this number says so many things, and we'll get into that today, that I don't even know when someone starts to get sick and all the symptoms just start to spiral. Like, doctors won't even ask these questions, let alone, I don't even know how you would take this thing and factor it in what it is someone's experiencing, especially the older they are. Because this is someone that gets choked out every night at sleep. I don't care if your child's 4 years old or it's your great-grandpa. If your airway's not big enough, we lack the plumbing to be able to breathe with ease. The older we get, our body gets less efficient. Our plumbing gets old too. But if the plumbing's not even big enough to begin with, how are we supposed to breathe? How are we supposed to get the job done? We're not. And I think oftentimes this is a lot of kids, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 years old. The thing is, you could just compensate like a champion when you're under 20, 25 years old. And then we start to get older, and we think because we're young and we exercise, 25, 30 years old, that like, yeah, I probably just need a little bit more sleep, but we don't even start to recognize that there's issues. And then there's young kids that actually suffer from the get-go. ADHD, kids that literally have asthma, allergies. They're like bubble kids since the age of birth. That's how I was. Asthma attacks in the hospital at 2 months old. And then it's like realizing I had strep throat every year. I was a mouth breather my whole life. Every dentist would laugh at me and be like, oh yeah, your gums bleed so easily, you're a mouth breather. Not one single doctor ever talked about what's going on in this picture. And I think the majority of health issues all stem from right here. We definitely can't separate any health issues from what's going on in this picture. It's just a matter of how much is what's going on here a contributing factor, and then what this does to a system that can't possibly be healthy, and what that does over time. Because basically, when this isn't in a good place from a numbers perspective, our body feels like it's under attack in wartime all day long, every day. It might not seem like it, but for a child that lives in war every single day in their backyard for years on end, it just becomes normal. For the same reason, I think a lot of children, they just don't know any better. And why would a parent think that their 3, 4, 5-year-old has sleep apnea or breathing problems? Because none of their friends or no one's ever told them about anyone that they know that has this. But this thing is everything when it comes to how we breathe. And with the intermolar width, what I want to start with today is just talking about like, what is it? Which is basically, it's a measurement. First set of molars on your upper jaw. And what that does is show the width of the jaw. Why is this so important? Because it helps give an understanding as far as what is the width of the nasal cavity. So when we think about like a plumbing situation, the wider my jaw, the better the plumbing. One of the most important principles when it comes to flow and how we breathe is Sully's law, that basically talks about flow and talks about like the dimensions in a pipe, and that it's a radius times the 4th power. So I think oftentimes we're talking about the difference between someone being good versus maybe not so good. We're talking 4 or 5 millimeters, which might seem like nothing. But then when we take that to the 4th power, and then we take that pipe all the way from outside the body deep within, it makes a dramatic difference. And this is why you can't see it physically between two adults standing next to each other. One that's got a 30 millimeter jaw versus 40, it would be hard for anyone to tell even remotely how different their jaws are. So it's not something we can discern visually. Obviously, we've seen the NFL linebacker that looks like a hoss. He's bigger than a tank. And yeah, he's got big bones. You can tell he's got a big jaw, good jawline. But I have a pro golfer that works at my gym. Just turned 32. He's probably about 6% body fat. Grew up in Canada. And his upper jaw is 32 millimeters. He basically has this young kid that started training with him here about 6 months ago. The kid is 12. He's about 2/3 the size of my trainer. He's actually in the middle of getting expanded right now. And the little kid, if you saw him next to my trainer, you would never think that he has a bigger jaw, and his jaw is already 40 millimeters. So from a perspective of just visually being able to see it, you can. I remember explaining to the kid that like he has a bigger jaw than my trainer. And here's my trainer who's 6%, 7% body fat that has severe sleep apnea. He has a CPAP, he has a mandibular advancement device as well, kind of tethers between the two. And I'm explaining to this kid that like, your trainer has sleep apnea. He's like, what are you talking about? And I think we're so conditioned to think that it's like the old guy with a gut that's snoring, that like we are unaware that there's this other type of sleep issue nowadays, and it's called UARS, upper airway respiratory syndrome. And basically, this is a lot of young, healthy people. This was me. You know, someone that like, they've just been sick their whole lives. They're a mouth breather. Maybe they just have labored breathing their whole lives. And a lot of this just comes back to this number. So there was a famous dentist, Dr. McNamara, in the 60s, 70s, worked out of University of Michigan, go Blue, one of my best friends went to school there. And what he did was follow a bunch of kids from early on in life to adulthood to just kind of take hundreds of measurements and kind of see what mattered, what happened with these kids from a development standpoint, how many of them had teeth that all fit, wisdom teeth, all these things, to see like what was what from a pure research standpoint. And basically what he determined was there was one statistically significant number when it came to all of the data, and that was this number, the intermolar width. And basically he said it was the one number that was a good predictor of proper growth and development of the dental arches. And this is something where in all of his research, he realized that like there was this small group of kids that by the age of 12 years old, they were roughly 35 to 40 millimeters, which is when the jaw oftentimes doesn't grow that much more. So here are these kids that seem to be healthy, they had good occlusion, their teeth they had plenty of space in their teeth as kids, there was plenty of room for the teeth to grow in. So from a good occlusion standpoint / a health perspective, here you have these kids that are thriving. And then they started to look at all these other kids, and they started to look at some research from Dr. KEVEN Boyd talks about, Dr. Bogue from the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he was the one who turned me on to this basically dentist, worked out of Paris, New York City, London, kind of treating basically the children of the wealthy in these cities that were privileged and had access to, you know, just giving their kids the best that science had to offer. And what he found was that by 6 years old, if a kid wasn't 30 millimeters or larger, that this was a comorbidity for health. That it was going to basically turn these kids from nasal breathers into mouth breathers. And there was going to be a host of issues for the rest of their life as it relates to sleep, the way the body postures up, all of these things. And what he found was that he would expand between 4 and 6 years old with these kids, that basically they would take 24 millimeters and then add 1 millimeter basically per year of age, from a roughly, hey, I need this kid by 30 millimeters to get to at least a healthy place by age 6. And then fast forward 100 years in the work of Dr. McNamara, and what he found was that optimally you wanted to have these kids at 30 millimeters by age 4. Basically being 30 millimeters and being 5, 6 years old versus at 4 means that there was some crowding and that we should really pay attention, but optimally we want our kids there at 4 years old. Because basically from the age of 2, 50% of our airway is already developed, 70% by age 4. So a few things that matter here are that when a kid is young, their palate is like soft wax, easily moldable, something where these kids, it doesn't take much to really help give them a healthy head start towards life. As we get older, everything solidifies, basically turns to hard bone, and things get harder and harder. From the patterns we live with our tongues and our oral posture to what's going on with our bite, needing teeth removed, braces, all these things. But basically the work of these guys has shown me that basically up until a few hundred years ago, basically pre-industrial revolution, our jaws were 45, 50 millimeters for anyone that was 18 years old, no matter where you went in the world. Nowadays, most of us have airways that are 30 or 40% too small. So we have the highest levels of pollutants, allergens in the air. We're now locked indoors because of what modern life has brought to us. We no longer chew any foods and have real need for strong mastication, good strength in our jaws, our tongues. And we just don't develop the way we once did, coupled with an even harder environment to breathe in, and this has become an issue. So what you see is that you end up waking up one day, you've read a bunch, you realize you're 43 years old, and you get the job of a 5-year-old. And it just so happens when you were 6, you broke your nose, and one of your nostrils is barely even open. It's about the size of a Capri Sun straw. So I basically have one nostril, and I have the upper jaw and nose of a 5 or 6-year-old trying to run a body built for a V10 engine, and I'm living off of a golf cart engine. And it starts to make sense. Wow, this is why I've been sick my whole life. This is why so many kids, it starts at a young age and parents just don't know what they're looking for. I had asthma attacks at 2 months old. Back then, it was a thing that my mom thought it was better for me to have formula, that somehow it was marketed that you're going to get stuff in formula that you can't get in breast milk. We're adding healthy ingredients. And as a result, I didn't breastfeed. I never learned how to pressurize in my oral cavity. I basically grew up on the East Coast where there's tons of mold and horrible weather. And basically nose got stuffed up at a young age with the inability, because I didn't really teach myself how to nasal breathe, and the perfect storm. That is a life spent mouth breathing. And what I realize now is genetics plays a huge role in this. It's crazy. I will see women who have jaws of 40 millimeters or larger, and they sleep good at 40, 50 years old, and they weren't breastfed, yet they just got good genetics. And then there's some that have been breastfed, and maybe a year or 2 years of their life, and their jaws are 30, 31 millimeters. And they ate pretty healthy, and it just didn't matter. And I think when it comes to this, there's so many factors, but a few that I want to talk to you about today. First of all, there's genetics like I got, and then there's LeBron genetics. And When you're born with LeBron genetics, you don't have to show up the way someone that's having a hard time making the high school team. Not enough size, not enough athleticism. So when we talk about genetics, like, that is humongous. You know, like, where have your genetic codes come from? You know, is it something that the generation or two prior to you thrived from a health perspective, or is it from a place of poverty? You know, there's so many factors, but when you're not born with A-grade genetics, you need to get more things right. You've got less chance for error if you still want to show up and be able to play some decent ball. And in this case, we're talking about life. So the one thing more than anything in this equation is going to be genetics. Like, some people just get lucky. Pretty sure you take Serena and have a baby with LeBron, and you could probably feed the kid junk food and they're still going to be a superstar athlete, and I bet their child's a nose breather and they turn out like a freak of nature. So some things don't matter. But for those that don't have those genetics, everything matters, because you got to get everything right, coupled with the hustle of Rudy Rudiger, to possibly make your name in this world. And it starts with breastfeeding. So I think like this, when I talk about breastfeeding now, I think about, let's just say my goal is the first 3 years of life. From an athlete status, I want to get a child to the best optimum place as it relates to athletic form, function, development. Breastfeeding by far teaches a child at a young age to basically seal the palate. That in itself is a skill. The actual breastfeeding itself forces the child to swallow. It seals off the palate like a cave. What that does is hold space in the airway, forcing the child to start to learn how to use the tongue, to start to shape the soft palate, which is flat like a piece of wax, which will mold the palate off of the tongue. And then it forces the pump mechanism, which is the nose, to all start to work together. So when we talk about breastfeeding, it's like reps. It's no different than here in the gym. The more reps you get in at a young age, you set the pattern into play, it becomes second nature. You just get better and better at it. Or you don't even have to be thinking about it, you do it subconsciously. This is what happens to children when they start from a nasal breathing perspective. Breastfeeding helps enhance that. When a child is drinking out of a bottle, there is no sealing of the palate. Therefore, they can still breathe out of their mouth while they're drinking out of a bottle. Not to say they don't breathe out of their nose, but it doesn't seal the palate the same way out of a nipple does. The way a nipple works is basically like a fuselage of basically a gas line going into an airplane. It suctions, and a baby has to uncouple to start mouth breathing. They are forced through suction, and that suction in itself is what holds internal structure and form for the palate from an oral posture perspective, as well as how we lay down bone in the face. When you've protected that from an early on stage, it's like basically like a snowball that keeps getting bigger. And when we're forced to nasal breathe, our sinuses hold form just like a brand new pumpkin. So now we've got the nostrils as well as the oral cavity that's all being held open, because that pressure, that negative pressure from the inside is what gives the scaffolding effect, forcing the bone to grow wider and wider. For a lot of people that don't have that suction, it's basically a pumpkin that's 4 weeks old. It actually feels like it's starting to implode and melt. And this is where you've got recessed eyes in your pumpkin. It's starting to get shorter. We lose that scaffolding from within the pumpkin over time. And that is what the pressure of breastfeeding does. So that's numero uno from this will help get a child starting to breathe properly. For those that can't, it's gonna be okay, because I've seen it happen for people too. That just means that you've got to get more things right if you're not coming out the gate with that. Because it's just like a training aid. It's just going to help a child learn to breathe better. The other thing oftentimes too is the milk has a bioidentical structure to that which the baby was developed. So when we talk about food allergies, gas, reflux, all those things, there's also that factor from an early development perspective. But the most important two things outside of that moving forward are going to be, one, getting your child, the minute they're old enough, to start to chew. Giving your kids foods at a very, very young age that's not goo, mush, things with nutritional value that force their jaws and their tongues to work. Anything that's going to challenge your child's gums, teeth to work without cutting them is going to be what helps strengthen the jaw. And I think a lot of people have heard this whole like, oh, it's breastfeeding. What I have learned from all the reading from literally the best doctors all over the world is that the chewing is what provides the oral structure and function and posture in the airway that the bone grows around. So when your child is only eating soft foods, it's basically like the kid that the only exercise they get every day is walking to and from the bus. Okay? The child that's eating all kinds of stuff, beef, organic beef jerky, chewy type vegetables at the age of 1 or 2 years old. This is a kid that's been basically jogging up a mountain and playing sports every day. So from a posture perspective and a strength perspective of all the muscles in the jaw and the face, you now have a child, when they're sleeping, they have the ability to sustain posture from a breathing / strength perspective without things falling apart. And if someone doesn't have a high enough level of endurance in their oral cavity, when we get into deeper levels of sleep, the pressure levels become more demanding in order to stay nasal breathing. A lot of these kids, their oral cavity falls apart. It can't sustain the pressure levels. Part of it is from their pipes not being as big as maybe another child's. The other thing is they lack the posture and endurance in order to sustain the pressure levels of deep sleep. And then these kids start to open their mouth. And then they do it again and again and again. And what was once a stuffy nose for a few nights is now a habit. And now they're breathing out of their mouth during the day. And the hardest habit when it comes to the human body is to unlearn a habit. To get a child that switches from nasal breathing to mouth breathing, to come back to nasal breathing when they've done it for a while, requires a serious upgrade in hardware and software. And oftentimes it's very challenging to do. The number one rule is this: just don't ever let it happen. The more we protect kids at a young age from this happening ever, the better off we're going to be. The second thing from a food perspective is it's giving your kids the challenging foods. The other side of that is what they're not putting in their bodies. Crap. mush, goo, juice, sugar, processed carbohydrates. It's often not just about getting to work, because your child can do all the chewing in the world. It's no different than any of my athletes in this gym. They hit the gym hard every day of the week. You can't go home and eat McDonald's. If I'm talking about making this child the best child they can physically be at 3 years old, bone broth, salad, organic meats, grass-fed beef, all these things matter. Making sure they're hydrated, get all the micronutrients they need, and keeping crap out of their system. Because there's this other factor that matters, and that is the building blocks which enhance the DNA that we were given. And genetic response to food is huge. Probably one of the best books I've ever read in my life, The Dental Diet by Dr. Stephen Lin. He's a dentist in Australia. It's amazing. It really hit home from an Airway perspective, but it also spoke to the health and demise of a modern day diet and what it's done to our health. And the biggest thing I've seen from, even moms that are nursing and nutrients they might not get and how that affects the fetus. And I've had moms reach out to me like, well, blah, 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 like babies get everything they need. And it's like, they get most of the things, but there's other things that they don't necessarily get. And then there's certain places in the world where there's different things that they don't get. So supplementing that is huge. And it's important to know, it's like, well, is 85% enough of what your child needs? Or like, would you like to give them 100? Because I'd like to give every child the best chance possible. And this isn't a guilt, shame type thing. This is most people just don't know. And that's why I'm here talking about this. But the difference between your kid's nostrils being like that versus slightly bigger to where one fits in the other matters. The other thing is, a lot of your kids' nostrils are soft in the middle because the structure in which everything was built isn't solid, versus something like this that it doesn't move. So imagine you're trying to move air all the way down the body. And I've either got this soft, elastic, bouncy, it's not very rigid, it doesn't move. Air very fast because it's got a lot of resistance from the turbulence, versus something like this that's solid, it's bigger. I'm gonna choose this every time. And when a child is going to develop 70% of their plumbing by age 4, that doesn't give you much time to get on this the minute your child is born. Because when your child wakes up in their 40s and they got the job of 6-year-old and they wonder why they've been sick their whole life, you can't do anything about it. The damage has been done. And you end up like myself, where you've had your tonsils, adenoids, deviated septum fixed. I've had 2 palate expansions. They cut open my jaw. I had braces. I've had a tongue tie removed. I've had a nasal valve released. This is in 4 years. I've spent like 50 grand. And even now my airway is 42 millimeters, okay? So just to give you perspective, I've had 3 moms in the last week that told me they expanded their 5-year-old because they all had sleep apnea. Their 5-year-old, their jaws are 41 millimeters at 5. I've had braces 4 times in my life. I just used 2 palate expanders and I'm at 42. these little kids literally had like the equivalent of like a little piece of metal between their back teeth, and then all you do is turn it. It's like by the time I was 10, I had a living room the size of what you would find in New York City. Versus these kids now, you expand these kids at 5 years old, their living room at their house is the size of my whole house in New York City. And it's because you make room early on. We just don't chew like we once did for hours a day. We can't get to good numbers anymore naturally. And you can have great genetics, but even then, the story doesn't look great. I've heard Ben Miraglia, amazing dentist in New York City, say, it's not fair of me to say 100%, but 99% of kids today are underdeveloped. He's like, we can't get much worse. This is pretty much every kid. This isn't like maybe every other kid, like not seeing a child. I'm guessing it's just a matter of how far behind the 8 ball they are. But it's like, they're not behind if you're comparing them to all their friends, because all their friends are behind too. Like, this is every kid, and most parents don't know. But do I think 20 years from now, every kid will get expanded 3, 4, 5 years old? Yes, I do. And then most kids will actually have wisdom teeth that fit, probably won't need braces, and all this stuff, asthma, CPAPs, it will go away. But somehow between now and then, this is going to affect your child's life. And it's what you do with it and how seriously you take this that can do a lot to help your child for the rest of their lives. Your kid's never gonna know what they could have had if you didn't do something. Like, they could have been really sick, but you just put an expander in them at 4 years old, and it's kind of like, oh, they don't even remember it, and now they've got an airway that's ready to attack life for the rest of their lives without all the sickness that follows it. So I want to give you guys a few stories, okay? So I've done a few surveys, a lot of athletes in my gym, my employees. So I'll start with this. I've got 3 guys that work for me, okay? 28, 29, 32. 32-year-old, he's been diagnosed severe sleep apnea. He's like 6% body fat, was a professional golfer. If you saw him, you would never think sleep apnea, and it is severe. I think he had an AHI of like 49, which is ridiculous, okay? I've got another guy who had sleep problems his entire life. He wakes up every day. It takes him about 15 minutes to unlock his jaw because he clenches and grinds all night long. He's 28 years old, probably deadlift 600 pounds. Once again, ripped, probably 6'1", 190 pounds. Another guy just picked up from the Yankees, okay? 14 years old. He basically went through his handlebars while he had braces, lost his front 6 teeth, basically smashed in his jaw, has a bridge across his top jaw, has the nose of like a 6-year-old. Mouth is open all day long. He's aware that it's an issue. He's always tired, fatigued. But for him, it's a matter of like, he can't just expand his jaw because he has 6 fake teeth across his upper jaw to bring into finding someone to do that. And to him, it seems like a lot of work to go figure that out. And he still says he wakes up refreshed, but it's a matter of he knows it's an issue. Okay? I have another employee. He has 2 little girls, 7 and 9 years old. So earlier this year, I had them do these little wax bites. And it's a good way to measure your intermolar width. And his 2 daughters were 28, 29 millimeters. Like I said, going back to max you want to be is 30 at age 6. So when we use the equation, 24 millimeters, someone's 7 years old, roughly 31, the 9-year-old 33, they're under the mark. But the world doesn't know this. And this isn't a doctor telling them. So, yeah, these people just go on with their lives. My niece, okay, right around this time, she lived in Oregon back when she was 7. I didn't even know this happened. So I was like, you know what? I just want to measure my niece. This was Halloween last year. She was 11 at the time. And I measured her jaw, and all of a sudden I'm like, holy shit. She was 38 millimeters. Okay. So when we go back to the 7 and 9-year-old, okay, they're 28, 29 millimeters. She's 38. My 3 employees that have smaller jaws and sleep issues are 34, 35, and 32 millimeters. So my 11-year-old niece that was like 4'9" had a bigger jaw than all 3 of my employees. And then for me, back before I did my first expansion, this was 4 years ago, I was 28 millimeters. So let's just say I had the jaw of a 4 or 5-year-old, and one of my nostrils was pretty much all the way occluded. If you saw my 3 employees and myself, we all look like this spitting image of health. Eat healthy, exercise every day. It doesn't matter. From a sleep perspective, it's an issue. And it's not a sleep breathing problem, it's a breathing problem. If you can't breathe, our nervous system knows it all day long. It's a matter of our nervous system isn't going to be happy. We're going to overbreathe because we lack the plumbing. Our body gets tired from overworking, and then the thing that we need to help us recover, sleep, we suck at it because we can't breathe and get good sleep when we do sleep. It's like this vicious cycle that we can't get out of. So like I said, a young child, they put a small little piece of metal across the back few molars. They turn it when a child's 3, 4, 5 years old, like their palate is super soft like wax. It's literally like these things it's just like making space. It's like wanting your living room to be a little bit bigger, and you're like, I'm just gonna push on the wall, and it just slides. That's what it's like expanding a young kid. But what you're doing is giving them the freedom for the rest of their lives to have enough space for a healthy airway. The thing is, if no one's telling you these numbers, how would you know where your child is and what are good numbers? So what I have seen, I started doing this survey, 20 to 50-year-old adults, right? The majority of people are definitely this side of 40. I think I looked at the first 9 women I entered, all of them said they clench their teeth 7 nights a week, and none of them work out refreshed. And the women that I do find that basically wake up refreshed and don't feel like they have sleep disorder breathing start around 38 millimeters. I'd say I have 4 women that are over 40 millimeters and they're good, and I had one girl that she's 38. The rest of these people that are below that number, this is adults, women, it's not enough. These adults that I'm talking about will all be your kids 30 years from now. It matters. These are women that are like, yeah, I'd do whatever it takes. The problem is, most people aren't crazy like me. They're not willing to go get 2 palate expansions, a facial surgery, and take a few random day trips to get surgeries on your face in Dallas and LA because you are relentless when it comes to your health. but like, this stole my life for the last 15 years of my life. Like, little by little. Haven't dated the last 3.5 years. I want a wife, kids, like my fatigue is so bad. I haven't drank in 5. I gave up everything, and on weekends, all I would do is rest and read until I understood enough of how to go and help get my health back. And that's what this did for me. And this is what I want to pass along to parents, is just help your kids. This is so much more serious than you know. I had a post today, and this guy commented. He was like, quit fear-mongering people. I was talking about how mouth breathing, I feel like, I compared it to smoking. This person's like, come on. And I'm like this was my comment, because this is how much I understand mouth breathing will affect your health for the rest of your life. I think if you gave me a nasal breather from birth that exercised and ate healthy, but decided to smoke cigarettes for 5 years of their life, versus someone that mouth breathed from birth and they never fixed this, you give me both people at 60, and I would bet money that the mouth breather has worse health problems than the person that could nose breathe their whole life and they just chose to smoke cigarettes for 5. Because all sickness comes from inflammation, nervous system dysregulation, and basically lack of sleep and recovery. If you can't breathe, your nervous system is never happy. That is your state for the rest of your life. When your nervous system is fired up, how good do you think you sleep when you think there's gonna be bombs going off, because every night is war? This is your internal clock. This is your system that you're using. When you can't sleep and you can't breathe, how long do you make it before you blow things out and you never get it back? How many of these things get triggered in life and you can't get back to a good place because you can't stop drowning? If you could just find some solid ground and get a few good nights of sleep, but that's the thing, it doesn't happen. This just gets worse and worse. And it's the number one thing. Like, it pains me to see so many of my friends. I don't want to have surgery and I don't want to wear masks. And these people suffer. It's like someone's squishing a little bit of your mojo soul out of you a little bit more each day. And because you haven't lived into it by the age of 50, 60, you can feel it, but it hasn't crushed your soul yet. But that's what this does. It's like a 50-year train to stealing your soul. And then depending on the sickness that you get along the way, it couples to that and enhances the negative effect. And when you get autoimmune diseases or learning disabilities, it's just that much harder to compete in a world with those that don't have those things. I think statistically, sleep apnea will take 20% of your life gone due to what it does to your system. And it all starts here. It's being aware of some stuff that matters. And what I want to do today is I want to finish with, there's a Dr. Marisa Santos, okay? I think she is the Michael Jordan paving the way in this world. So she has a program out in Buenos Aires. You guys can find her. She's basically in charge of the School of Orthodontics, Buenos Aires, the college there. And she has a program where she expands basically 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds. And I reached out to her about a month ago, and I just had some questions because oftentimes in her posts and stuff like that, it's not in English, so it's like I don't get to really hear. But I've heard a colleague of hers, Dr. Sandra Kahn, another brilliant mind in this world, who wrote the book Jaws, talk about Marisa Santos. And it's basically this. She said to me, pretty much every child that comes through my door, I expand their jaw. Basically 6 months, she'll expand the child, 3, 4, 5, 6. As long as they've got something they can attach an expander to, she starts expanding. At the end of the 6 months, she puts them through 3 months of myofunctional therapy called her GOPEX program. At the end of that, the child goes away for a year. They then come back a year later and she tests them to see if their nasal breathing can seal the palate, that their oral posture looks good. If so, have a good life. If not, she does it again. She said, most kids are good after you do it the first time. Sometimes a kid will have to go through the whole thing a second time. But at that point, most of these kids, the trajectory has been set early enough in life that like they're set. Their airway is good to go. The older you get, the more things it often requires to go back and undo what's been done. And when it comes from a functioning, a motor learning, a breathing perspective, if we never let a child stop nasal breathing, we help protect one of their most important skills in life, something that's our greatest insurance policy. If you breathe well, you sleep well, there's nothing better for health than those two things. You take care of those things, you basically take 90% of the BS off the table. This is a child just set up to kill it, and they don't even know it. It's more like coming from someone that's had to do all these things. It's like, I have been to probably 200-300 doctors in my life. I've chased doctors all over the world looking for answers to this. What started as a necessity to heal myself became a passion. And then I realized just how screwed up our medical system is, and how many other people and kids are like just falling into the same bucket as I am, and they can't find answers and they can't get better. And I'm like, holy shit, like this is infuriating, because I love my job. Like, I get to work with athletes, I get to help people get healthy. And as much as I love that, we're working with a pro athlete, like nothing is more important in life than helping a child that's sick have their life back, or an adult. It breaks my heart. I know what it was like for me, like watching the rest of the world go on, and like all my friends getting married and kids. Like, I love kids. I'm so excited to get married and have kids, like, and to see the world going on, and you're like, it's like this bubble, and you just get one more layer further away from what's going on outside of this bubble every single day. It's like the colors get less bright. You can't feel what's going on in the room, and there's just this huge distance between you and the world. And that is what inflammation, brain fog, fatigue will do to you. It just takes your soul. You just don't have the energy. And you get up every day hoping that somehow it changes. And I think there's so much wrapped up in this, so many answers for so many people's sickness and cause for their symptoms, and people don't know. And this one number, this one thing, I feel like should be protected at all costs. It's super easy. A child can bite on a wax plate, cost 40 cents. No one you've ever met has probably ever even talked to you about this, unless you're already in the know. But this is everything. You keep a child nasal breathing, they probably don't have asthma. They probably don't have allergies because they filtered everything coming in their body since birth through their nose, which didn't blow out their lungs. They probably don't have sickness. or it's once every few years, not every season like clockwork for their entire childhood. But this thing is so much larger than I ever imagined, and I just want to keep sharing the message here, because my goal is to just help people find answers, stop the suffering, and like allow people to just go do what they love about life. And I appreciate you guys tuning in today. I know I get pretty heated up when it comes to this, but it's like, what I didn't have in this picture robbed me of so many things in my life. That my passion comes from the fire and the anger and the frustration I feel for our medical system and those that we think are there to help protect and guide us from the best protocols, medications, situation. Like, they're not. The system is not designed that way. It's designed to treat symptoms, not prevent disease from occurring in the first place. And if I got to become the dictator for our medical system starting tomorrow, this would be something where every doctor, pediatrician, kindergarten teachers, all young doctors, speech therapists, everyone would be looking for nasal resistance. How does that tie into basically a child's jaw? How do we keep kids nasal breathing for the rest of their life? What are the signs, symptoms? How do I get these kids help? Where do they go? Why? Like, those things will change in the next 10 years. Thank God for social media, because it's like they can't hide the truth. And I think there's enough people in this world suffering that it will get out. And more people are starting to realize that. And, I just hope you guys know I'm here to help in any way. My goal with this today is to just bring awareness, continue to share the fact that like there are answers, and it's so much easier when your kids are little, and that you're probably going to find doctors in your backyard that don't even know what the hell I'm talking about right here. And when people don't know something, they often aren't willing to tell you they don't know. So what do? They tend to deflect. And the deflect typically looks like, your child's fine. Let's wait. 70% developed by age 4. How much time? Thank you.